Hello and welcome back to the fifth installment of the Harry Potter video series, where, naturally, we will be covering the Order of the Phoenix. In this book, we get to draw parallels between the Ministry of Magic and the government of today's society. We get to look at media and their influence, and also how people can't recognize the dystopia they read about even though they are living it. So without further ado, let's get into it. At the very beginning of the book, Harry is attacked by two Dementors and is summoned to a hearing at the Ministry. Their intentions are quite clearly to slap Harry with some sort of charge, which might go along to discredit him. As Hermione points out, Daily Prophet and the Ministry have been trying to turn Harry into something of a joke, trivializing anything he has to say so that no one would believe him. All of this for the sake of denial. The Ministry wishes to assure the public that Voldemort was not back, and that the only people peddling this narrative, Harry and Dumbledore, had to be discredited for that to work. Hit pieces came out against them both, and Dumbledore was being kicked out of several prestigious committees. And now, if Cornelius is able to show that Harry was a show-off and extremely reckless, then it would further discredit him. In fact, the Dementor attack on Harry was issued, albeit unknowingly, by the Ministry itself, as Dolores Umbridge had ordered the attack. And this is a very clear parallel in society today, where the media and the government have to attack those on the right, white nationalists in particular, in order to discredit their ideas. We only have to look at news reports concerning the January 6th quote-unquote insurrection, where they were vehemently cracking down on anyone even remotely involved. The same is seen during the trucker protest in Canada, where they found out the names of everyone who donated to a peaceful rally. However, on the converse, you have rioting and burning of buildings, pillaging and destruction of property during the BLM fiasco, and there were little to no repercussions for it. If you are caught posting racist tweets, you can now be arrested for hate speech, whereas a blind eye is being turned when it comes to violent crimes such as rape and murder if the perpetrator is non-white. Harry and Dumbledore have come under attack much the same as the right have, because they share a view that is contrarian to the government. Furthermore, Dumbledore and Harry only sought to tell the truth about Voldemort. The right also seek to tell the truth about diversity and multiculturalism, but they are obviously shot down as being called racists. The Ministry of Magic then decided that they had to address these issues at the source as well. Since Dumbledore was still headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he had a voice and several hundred students who would listen. And so, Dolores Umbridge was appointed as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, and she later adopts the role of High Inquisitor, which grants her the power to propagate the Ministry's lies within Hogwarts. The first time we meet Umbridge, she already gives the impression of an unlikable character. And as with all other unlikable characters in the book, they have to be associated in some small way to something that is related to the right, so that her first speech at Hogwarts wasn't all that bad. The Ministry of Magic has always considered the education of young witches and wizards to be of vital importance. The rare gifts with which you were born may come to nothing if not nurtured and honed by careful instruction. The ancient skills unique to the wizarding community must be passed down through the generations lest we lose them forever. The treasure trove of magical knowledge amassed by our ancestors must be guarded, replenished, and polished by those who have been called to the noble profession of teaching. Every headmaster and headmistress of Hogwarts has brought something new to the weighty task of governing this historic school, and that is as it should be, for without progress there will be stagnation and decay. There again, progress for progress's sake must be discouraged, for our tried and tested traditions often require no tinkering. A balance then between old and new, between permanence and change, between tradition and innovation. Because some changes will be for the better, while others will come in the fullness of time, to be recognized as errors of judgment. Meanwhile, some old habits will be retained, and rightly so, whereas others, outmoded and outworn, must be abandoned. Let us move forward then into a new era of openness, effectiveness, and accountability, intent on preserving what ought to be preserved, perfecting what needs to be perfected, and pruning wherever we find practices that ought to be prohibited. What she says isn't a bad speech. but it seemed that Hermione and teachers like Professor McGonagall took issue with what she said. Hermione even quotes lines from her speech that she disagreed with, such as progress for progress's sake and pruning practices that ought to be prohibited. Surely both of these aren't bad things. Progress for progress's sake has led us to become more and more inclusive of the left-wing ideologies, furthering the LGBTQ and giving them more power within society, and also the furthering of feminism, to the point where biology is ignored when it comes to the sexes. Pruning practices that ought to be prohibited follows to her previous points of preserving the good, perfecting some practices that have potential, and removing the bad. These talking points aren't bad, and they seem to lean more to conservatism and traditionalism, which is why they had to be attached to a nasty character. The obvious problem was that what I've pointed out with his speech is not the issues she wishes to address. She wanted to stop them from learning defense against the dark arts, as if one is to learn to defend themselves against evil, one must acknowledge the existence of evil. Therefore, it is as Bruce Shelton puts it. You may recall that Hogwarts classes in Defense Against the Dark Arts are made wholly theoretical, and focused on elementary, harmless, and useless responses. Meanwhile, the fact that Voldemort has returned and is preparing for war is ignored and denied. Because nobody wants Voldemort to have returned, Voldemort has not returned. Because effective defense against Voldemort carries risks. There must be no effective defense, and those who insist on preparing are taking needless risk. Because to prepare for disaster is scary, there must be no preparation for disaster, and those who do prepare are terrorizing the ignorant for their own selfish or deluded purposes. So that when she does arrive in class, she parrots the Ministry's lies, effectively goading Harry into an outburst, which is exactly what she wanted. With his outburst, she now had clear evidence that Harry was promoting Dumbledore's, quote, crazy conspiracy theory, unquote. And with this, she is able to vie for the authority and power that goes along with High Inquisitor. Now, something of note is that when Harry first talks to Professor McGonagall about this, she tells him that he should exercise a bit more common sense. He can't just go blabbing the truth everywhere, because that was how he got himself into trouble. And that is true of today's society as well. You have to be wary of speaking the truth, especially a truth that is against the government narrative. But now that we know Umbridge to be a very meddling woman, how do we make her even more nasty? We make her extremely prejudicial against non-humans, obviously. She clearly thinks very little of Hagrid throughout the novel, and she also makes choice criticisms on Lupin as he is a werewolf. Her insulting the centaurs is what causes her exit in the final chapters. I've addressed these already, however. Stereotypes against werewolves make sense. They are extremely dangerous, even Lupin. Stereotypes against giants are normal as well. In fact, Hermione even demonstrates this when she first hears Hagrid's tale and when she meets Grawp for the first time. She abandons all her moralizing about how giants just got a bad rep and was fearful when she heard of Hagrid's entry into the giant colony. She constantly asked questions such as, "But Hagrid, didn't they attack you on sight?" And when she was face to face with Grawp and heard of Hagrid's grand plan to civilize him and show the wizarding community that giants had the potential to be harmless, she bursts into tears and thinks that the idea is ridiculous and impossible. For all her advocacy of abandoning stereotypes, it seemed as if she couldn't deny reality once it was in front of her face, except when it came to house elves, of course, for in this novel she tries to free the house elves against their will, to the point where all house elves were extremely insulted, and Dobby was forced to clean the entire Gryffindor Tower by himself. After watching the movie, I've realized that they make Grawp out to be this sort of gentle giant in the film. He is shown being nice and kind to Hermione, when in the book he was extremely dangerous and dim-witted. He is prone to violence and is easily angered. When he tries to grab hold of Hermione, Harry actually pulls her out of the way and protects her in the book. Hermione was sobbing and extremely scared of Grawp. Grawp also becomes angry when Hagrid leaves, and angers the centaurs with his clumsiness, so that they fight one another.
Leave him alone! It's not his fault! No, he doesn't understand!
That's the same thing they say when discussing crimes with non-white perpetrators. So, what was there for Harry and the others to do, since the government and the media were against the truth? how could Harry, Ron and Hermione convince people that they were being lied to, and that Voldemort really had returned? Well, Hermione comes up with two ideas on how they could oppose this new regime coming into place. The first was inspired by the Order of the Phoenix, a group that sought to put in place certain defenses against Voldemort, and also tried to convince more people and have them join their cause. Her first idea is that of Dumbledore's army, where they would sidestep the Ministry's control and learn what they banned, so that they would be prepared for their exams, yes, but mainly to deal with the return of Voldemort. Her second stroke of brilliance came when there was a mass breakout from Azkaban prison, and Cornelius Fudge and the media decided to attribute the breakout to Sirius Black, and ignore all the warning signs that Dumbledore foretold. Upon reading this story, Hermione decides that people need an alternative to the official truth. If all that is presented to them is the government's version of events, then how are they to learn of the truth for themselves? Therefore, Hermione arranges an interview between Harry and Rita Skeeter, which would be published in The Quibbler, Luna's father's newspaper. Even though this is such a small publication, and there isn't much of an audience for The Quibbler, it gets a lot of reads, because here is an alternative to the government narrative. In fact, Umbridge goes so far as to ban it from being read in the school, and, as Hermione rightly pointed out, the one thing that she could have done which ensured that every single person in the school read the article was banning it. All of this is reminiscent of small groups today that try to provide an alternative for people to rally behind. Groups like Patriotic Alternative have come under attack by the media when all they do is preach the truth and try to advocate for the well-being of their own people. But their group is much closer to the side of good, like the Order of the Phoenix, except that the enemy they're fighting against isn't so cut and dry as Lord Voldemort. The evil we face in today's society are things like equality, diversity, inclusivity, and individualism. There is no one event that can turn the tide against them. Cornelius Fudge sees Voldemort at the end of this novel. He cannot deny it, and therefore has to address the public accordingly. In real life, there are many instances of the failings of equality and diversity. In fact, there is more than enough evidence to draw a conclusion. But to use the metaphor of Harry Potter, the Cornelius Fudge of today's society would stare directly into the eyes of Voldemort and insist that he hasn't returned. In fact, they would cover it up, bury it, blatantly lie about it, or just ignore it. Some of the most popular modern literature feature dystopias, the likes of The Hunger Games and Harry Potter. But when presented with this scenario in real life, people seem not to be able to recognize it. Bruce Shelton posited that this is because the evil in the books are more readily identifiable through their violent traits. Voldemort and his supporters are extremely cruel, torturing and killing muggles for sport. Dolores Umbridge is easily identifiable as an evil character because of her denial of reality and wishing to prevent Harry and the others from defending themselves. But she's considered evil only after her detention, which has Harry slicing his hand open repeatedly in a kind of torture. So her physical cruelty is what helps the reader to identify her as not a good person. In real life, it is much more difficult to identify, because these regimes are not necessarily violent or cruel. The pandemic introduced a layer of control over the population that would have made Umbridge proud, but people don't seem to recognize it for what it is. Whereas in the book, attempts were made to stop the protection of people, in real life, with the pandemic, there was a frantic rush to protect people against a non-critical threat.
Oh, it looks harmless.
It's kinda cute.
It reminds me of money.
Monster.
Now in both cases, it began with fear. Cornelius Fudge was paranoid that Dumbledore was creating some kind of army under his nose, and that Voldemort's return was a cover story to achieve his end. In real life, the fear came from the fact that the virus was fatal, and since the news and the governments were scrutinizing the numbers with magnifying glasses, it made the problem seem much more dire than it actually was. If you look at the statistics anywhere in the world, it would affirm that COVID-19 was not deadly to any young and healthy person. The chances of them having a fatal reaction to the virus was minimal and close to nothing. Yet the insistence was that everyone wear masks and get jabbed so as to protect themselves and those around them, and that effectively not to get it branded you as a murderer, as you didn't care for those who were around you who could get sick. Now, if I had to cover this topic in full, it would take far too much time. But the point is that the hidden agenda, the true evil, the totalitarian regime that had been imposed, plunging us into a dystopia of our own, was cleverly buried under a veneer of "it's for your own good." And so it went largely unnoticed. There are those who recognize it for what it was, however, those who could perceive the truth through their own eyes, like Harry did, or those who could perceive the truth through intelligence and reading the warning signs, as Dumbledore did. Recurring from the first set of novels is again Harry's inherent inequality with his fellow classmates. During the ending sequence in the novel, where they faced off against the Death Eaters, Harry is the only one unscathed at the end of the ordeal. The other 5 were incapacitated and did not contribute much to their journey. In fact, Neville, in his haste to help and be included in some small way, essentially blunders repeatedly, making it much harder for Harry and the others to have escaped the Department of Mysteries. If Harry were accompanied only by Ron and Hermione, as he wanted, then things might have played out very differently. They might actually have been able to escape. But they were separated during their battle because of the size of their group. And then, since Ginny and the others were hurt following their separation, it made it much more difficult for them to flee the Ministry. Harry shows just how quick he can think on his feet, and he is a natural leader, ready to overcome whatever obstacles were hurled his way. In this novel, we also get Harry's destiny revealed at last. Harry is destined to defeat Voldemort. No one else can achieve this, only Harry. And Harry had defied Voldemort 4 times already, something that no one had been able to achieve prior. There are several things omitted from the movies in adapting the book to film, one of which were the interesting rooms inside the Department of Mysteries, where seemingly they were making the abstract something tangible. In one room there was the concept of time, in another the concept of death, another held the concept of thought, and one even explored the power of love. This was incredibly interesting to read in the novel, but at the same time I do like the ambiguity surrounding it, so that my mind is free to wander when presented with these abstractions. Another important thing that was cut from the movie was Harry's discussion with Nearly Headless Nick after Sirius's death. He asked Nick about death, and how he was able to remain here and be able to talk to Harry. Nick was uncomfortable with this topic of conversation, but he answered dolefully. Nick explained to Harry that he himself was afraid of death, and so chose his pale imitation of life instead, a choice he will regret for all eternity. He knew nothing of the secrets of death, because he had never experienced it truly. Sirius would not return as a ghost, for it was a fate worse than death. To live as a pale imitation for all time, watching everything crumble away and die before your eyes. Harry was predictably broken up about this, but when he speaks with Luna, he feels a bit better. "No," said Luna, observing him with those oddly misty, protuberant eyes. "I don't suppose you do. That man the Death Eaters killed was your godfather, wasn't he? Ginny told me." Harry nodded curtly, but found that for some reason he did not mind Luna talking about Sirius. He had just remembered that she too could see Thestrals. "Have you," he began, "has anyone you've known ever died?" "Yes," said Luna simply, "my mother. She was a quite extraordinary witch, you know, but she did like to experiment, and one of her spells went rather badly wrong one day. I was 9. "I'm sorry," Harry mumbled. "Yes, it was rather horrible," said Luna conversationally. "I still feel very sad about it sometimes, but I've still got Dad. Anyway, it's not as though I'll never see Mom again, is it?" Isn't it?" said Harry uncertainly. She shook her head in disbelief. "Oh, come on, you heard them, just beyond the veil, didn't you?" "You mean, in that room with the archway? They were just lurking out of sight, that's all. You heard them." They looked at each other. Luna was smiling slightly. Harry did not know what to say, or to think. Luna believed so many extraordinary things, yet he had been sure he had heard voices behind the veil too. This is one of the most wonderful things that Luna has ever said in the novels, and it was cut from the movies. In fact, they cut most of the really nice scenes with Luna, but this one in particular, compounded with the omission of the Nick scene, really takes away from the deeper message of the novels. Having watched the movies, I've only just realized that Harry talking to her about her mom was stripped of all meaning, as it was said in a throwaway conversation about Thestrals. I'll end with some criticisms of the movie. Now, much of the criticism of this movie follows from the previous films. Harry is a victim. He is shown to be more effeminate in the films, whereas he was much more like a leader personality type in the books. But let's start at the beginning. The very first scene shows Dudley acting like a great bully and seems almost like a person with Down syndrome.
Hey, Big D. Beat up another 10-year-old?
This one deserved it.
Yeah. 5 against 1. Very brave.
Well, you're one to talk. Moaning in your sleep every night. At least I'm not afraid of my pillow. Don't kill Cedric. Who's Cedric? Your boyfriend?
Shut up.
He's going to kill me, Mum! Where is your mum? Where is your mum, Potter?
In any case, it was a really cringe scene and awkwardly done. Whereas in the book, it was actually Harry insulting Dudley. And Dudley said all those things as retorts to Harry's own insults. It was much more natural, as it was just the two of them heading home, but in the movie it becomes another way for them to paint Harry as the victim. Harry looks so meek receiving the news that he was going to be expelled from Hogwarts, and then during the hearing he seems exactly the same way. Most of my past criticisms on Dumbledore apply here, so I'm not even going to waste my breath on him. Then, when Harry arrives at Sirius's place, instead of shouting angrily at Hermione and Ron, he again, rather meekly, tells them that he wanted to feel included. He shows signs of playing the victim during detention with Umbridge, and after, he even makes a comment about not having parents. When Harry has the dream about Ron's dad, he again plays the victim in Dumbledore's office. He expressed similar notions with Sirius, and then at the end of the movie, there were several counts to make him appear as the victim again.
It's completely unfair.
Yeah. There's a lot of that going around at the moment. So what is this place?
It's headquarters.
Of the Order of the Phoenix. It's a secret society. Dumbledore formed it back when they first fought you-know-who.
You couldn't put any of this in a letter, I suppose. We've gone all summer without a scrap of news.
We wanted to write, mate. Really, we did. Only...
Only what?
Only Dumbledore made us swear not to tell you anything.
Dumbledore said that. But why would he want to keep me in the dark? I mean, maybe I could help. After all, I'm the one who saw Voldemort return. I'm the one who fought him. I'm the one who saw Cedric Diggory get killed. Harry...
Yes? You've got to tell Dumbledore.
No. Dumbledore's got enough on his mind right now. Anyway, I don't want to give Umbridge dissatisfaction.
Bloody hell, Harry. The woman's torturing you. If the parents knew about this...
Yeah, well, I haven't got any of those, have I, Ron?
Harry, you've got to report this. It's perfectly simple. You're
No,
being...
it's not. Hermione, whatever this is, it's not simple. You don't understand.
Help us to. Harry.
Can I join you?
But you all have studying to do.
Professor! Professor! Professor Dumbledore! Professor! Professor Dumbledore!
And last year, he really did fight off you-know-who in the flesh.
Wait. Look, it all sounds great when you say it like that, but the truth is most of that was just luck. I didn't know what I was doing half the time. I nearly always had help.
He's just being modest.
No, Hermione, I'm not. Facing this stuff in real life is not like school. In school, if you make a mistake, you can just try again tomorrow. But out there, when you're a second away from being murdered or watching a friend die right before your eyes, you don't know what that's like. When I saw Mr. Weasley attacked, I wasn't just watching. I was the snake. And afterwards, in Dumbledore's office, there was a moment when I wanted to... This connection between me and Voldemort. What if the reason for it is that I am becoming more like him? I just feel so angry all the time. And what if after everything that I've been through, something's gone wrong inside me? What if I'm becoming bad?
I want you to listen to me very carefully, Harry. You're not a bad person. You're a very good person who bad things have happened to.
Yeah, we talked you into it.
Yeah, but I agreed. I tried so hard to help, and all it's done is make things worse. Anyway, that doesn't matter anymore. Because I don't want to play it anymore. All it does is make you care too much. And the more you care, the more you have to lose. So maybe it's just better
To what?
to go it alone.
I may vomit.
Stop it!
You're the weak one. And you'll never know love. Or friendship. And I feel sorry for you.
Another thing to point out is this idea of the world revolving around Harry. Teenagers often have the common misconception that everyone is concerned with what they are doing, so that whenever they enter a room, they feel as if all eyes are on them and paying attention to their every movement, when in actuality, it is nothing of the sort. Throughout the movie, however, they play into this notion that everyone is interested in Harry and what he's saying. There are several times where everyone would stop and focus on Harry's conversation, like his argument and making up with Seamus, both of which were much more private in the book, but to make the scenes more dramatic, they had it in full view of the entire school. There's also the overpowering music in the background. These scenes cannot stand on their own. They must be accompanied by extremely emotional music, which indicates to the viewer how to feel. The use of the music is extremely reminiscent of the Feelies in Brave New World, a concept of cinema whereby grasping onto a bar in the cinema caused you to experience all the emotions that the movie intended you to feel, but upon releasing the bar, the awfulness of the movie becomes readily apparent.
I need that prophecy. You'll have to kill me.
Could you please predict something for me? I'm sorry?
Move those mouths!
We're gonna make them proud, Neville. That's a promise. Make it a powerful memory. The happiest you can remember. Allow it to fill you up. Keep trying, Seamus. George, your turn now.
Expecto Patronum.
A full-bodied Patronus is the most...
In the final action sequence, the characters come face to face with the Death Eaters in the Ministry of Magic. Now, there are many things wrong here. Firstly, they remove all of the interesting rooms from the Department of Mysteries. And second, none of the characters come into any real danger, as the Death Eaters don't land a single curse on any of the characters. There are lots of plot holes and things that don't make sense, and Harry is not shown as a leader type. The removal of the abstract rooms in the Department of Mysteries really took away the mysterious aspect of the department. Instead, they tried to achieve it with one singular room, the Death Room, but it just doesn't have the same effect. And none of the characters get into any real danger, as the Death Eaters don't harm any of them. In the book, Ginny's ankle was broken, causing her a lot of pain, and then she was hit by a stunning spell to the face which rendered her unconscious. Ron was hit by a spell that made everything around him seem funny, but then he tries to interact with a brain in the Thought Room, which almost suffocates him. Luna was thrown violently across a room where she crashed into a desk and slumped unconscious. And Hermione was hit by a dangerous spell that could have done serious damage, but luckily the person who casted the spell couldn't utter the incantation, and so it mitigated some of the damage. Neville had a broken nose and was bleeding a lot. He was also tortured by Bellatrix and hit with the Tarantalegra curse. Harry alone remained unscathed and battled fiercely within the department. Throughout the encounter, he was a natural leader, figuring out a way for them to get away from the Death Eaters, and then issuing commands which, if followed, would have mitigated some of the damage, perhaps even have stopped Sirius's death. In the movie, it is really messy.
You can wait a little longer. Now!
Every single Death Eater blocks the spell successfully, but for some reason they begin to do the flying smoke thing that was not present in the books. Then in the archway they use their flying ability again to grab every single one of them and hold them hostage, but apparently leaves both Harry and the prophecy alone. And if they could have done this, why didn't they do it to begin with? And now that they have everyone hostage, when the Order of the Phoenix arrives, why don't they harm their hostages, or even try to use them as leverage? The Order also apparently possess the ability to fly around, using white smoke instead. That is never shown again in any of the movies, so I don't know why they even bothered including it. There are a lot more things I can say about this movie, but those are the major points that I wanted to address. Was there anything good about this movie? Well, Dolores Umbridge and Snape seemed to act pretty good. Issuing over 100 degrees and installing the loudspeakers were also nice touches on Umbridge's regime. In fact, the loudspeakers remind me of my brother's school, where they regularly use the PA system to announce COVID-19 protocols to the students at different intervals during the day.
Boys and girls are not permitted to be within 8 inches of each other.
In conclusion, this movie is almost like a window into the mind of the left. They feel as if they are the center of attention. They're constantly playing the victim, and there are no really threatening situations in the end of the movie. In real life situations where life is on the line, one has to face up to reality, and most left-wing people cannot cope with these kinds of situations. What's more is that the trio in the movies have no clear chemistry between them. They don't seem like a group of best friends at all. They're all rather natural. Emotions feel faked, and it feels as if these three in the movie would never have been friends if they weren't based on the books. And they aren't the only characters that fake emotion.
After all these years, after all you've suffered, I didn't want to cause you any more pain. I cared too much about you. Harry Potter!
Everything is a conspiracy theory.
I protest!
Harry!
I protest!
Harry, did you put your name in a goblet of fire?
No, sir.
You asked one of the oldest students to do it for you?
No, sir.
I cared too much about you.
We also see very clear parallels between the Ministry and Umbridge with the totalitarian regime that has been imposed on us for the past 2 years, and is still ongoing today, which people clearly don't seem to recognize because of the lack of what Bruce Charlton terms Luciferic evil, that is, violence, suffering, and death. This novel brings us into the final 2 books of the series, which are a cut above the rest, and was a very enjoyable read. It does seem like a dystopian novel, with Umbridge's regime taking up the major plotline of the book, and it is one that is extremely relevant today. But the final scenes of the book also take us through Harry's grief, the lifting of his spirits through Luna, and through the final scene. He turned from Uncle Vernon to Harry. "So, Potter, give us a shout if you need us. If we don't hear from you for 3 days in a row, we'll send someone along." And Petunia whimpered piteously. It could not have been plainer that she was thinking of what the neighbours would say if they caught sight of these people marching up the garden path. "Bye then, Potter," said Moody, grasping Harry's shoulder for a moment with a gnarled hand. "Take care, Harry," said Lupin quietly. "Keep in touch." "Harry, we'll have you away from there as soon as we can," Mrs. Weasley whispered, hugging him again. "We'll see you soon, mate," said Ron anxiously, shaking Harry's hand. "Really soon, Harry," said Hermione earnestly. "We promise." Harry nodded. He somehow could not find words to tell them what it meant to him, to see them all arranged there on his side. Instead, he smiled, raised a hand in farewell, turned around and led the way out of the station, toward the sunlit street, with Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley hurrying along in his wake. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, consider giving it a like or a dislike if you didn't. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, subscribe for more, and if you'd like to support the channel, consider checking out my novel on Amazon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.